Welcome to the Ultimate Sports Blog Podcast. Today is Tuesday, August 14th, 2018. Today I'm going to recap yesterday's baseball games, look ahead to today's games, go over a misstep on my NFL running back rankings, and it's a player that's certainly going to be included in my top 100 rankings. It was a player that was hurt last year and wasn't on the team's depth chart for some reason. I'll talk about that. I'll do my coach rankings as well. I'll do my analysis on the NBC hockey schedule that came out yesterday, and another Yankees injury is a big story that I'll get to later on in the podcast as well. All right, Game 1 doubleheader. The Braves defeated the Marlins 9-1 as they improve to 65-51. Miami drops to 48-72. Touki Toussaint improves to 1-0. Pablo Lopez drops to 2-3. The Mets defeated the Yankees 8-5 as they improved to 50-66. The Yankees dropped to 74-44. Jacob deGrom improves to 7-7. Luis Severino drops to 15-6. Roberto Gesellman gets his 7th save of the season. The Tigers defeated the White Sox 9-5 as they improved to 50-69. The White Sox dropped to 42-76. Luis Coleman gets the win, improves to 4-1. Henmar Gomez drops to 0-1. The Indians defeated the Reds 10-3 as they improved to 67-51. Cincinnati drops to 52-67. Mike Clevenger improves to 8-7. Homer Bailey drops to 1-10. The Braves defeated the Marlins 6-1 in Game 2 of their doubleheader as they improved to 66-51. The Marlins dropped to 48-73. Mike Falta-Units improves to 10-7. Randy Gonzalez drops to 2-1. The Cardinals defeated the Nationals 7-6 on a walk-off home run by Paul DeJong. 2 straight walk-off home run losses for the Nationals as they dropped to 60-59. The Cardinals improved to 64-55. Dakota Hudson improves to 3-0. Coda Glover drops to 0-1. The Rangers defeated the Diamondbacks 5-3 as they improved to 53-68. The Diamondbacks dropped to 65-55. Bartolo Colon improves to 7-10. Zach Greinke drops to 12-8. Jose Larec gets his 2nd save of the season. The Royals defeated the Blue Jays 3-1 as they improved to 36-82. The Blue Jays dropped to 53-65. Brad Keller improves to 5-5. Sean Reed-Foley drops to 0-1. Willie Peralta gets his 7th save of the season. The A's defeated the Mariners 7-6. This is a wild game. The A's had a 7-1 lead. Racist Familia looked awful in the pen. Even Blake Trinan had a subpar game. Oakland improves to 71-48. Seattle drops to 69-51. Sean Manaea improves to 11-8. Marco Gonzalez drops to 12-8. Blake Trinan gets his 31st save of the season. The Giants defeated the Dodgers 5-2 as they improved to 60-60. The Dodgers dropped to 64-56. Ray Black improves to 2-1. Scott Alexander drops to 2-1. Will Smith gets his 9th save of the season. The Dodgers bullpen continues to miss Kenley Jansen. 3rd straight loss when leading in the 9th inning. And as I mentioned, Kenley Jansen sorely missed. And who knows, maybe this irregular heartbeat could be the difference between the Dodgers being out of the playoffs or in the playoffs. And that's really sad because I really like Kenley Jansen, and that's just bad luck getting an irregular heartbeat. The Angels defeated the Padres 6-3 in 10 innings as they improved to 60-60. San Diego drops to 48-73. Cam Bedrosian improves to 4-2. Craig Stammen drops to 5-2. Today's games, 2:20 NL Central Showdown. Brewers, Cubs, Wrigley Field. This is the Brewers' opportunity to get closer to the Cubs. Won't be easy in Wrigley Field. Julius Chacin against Jose Quintana. 7 o'clock tonight, Rays Yankees. Yankees trying to bounce back from a bad loss. They're sending Jay Happ out there. And your Rays opener today is Hunter Wood. Mets Orioles, let's see if the Mets can build momentum a little bit. Well, I should say fake momentum because they're not going anywhere this season. They're a better team than the Orioles. Jason Vargas against Andrew Kashner is your pitching matchup. Red Sox Phillies is the best matchup on the board. Rick Porcello and Nick Pivetta. That game's on MLB Network. Tomorrow's game will be on ESPN, and I'll pick tomorrow's game on tomorrow's podcast. White Sox Tigers, Lucas Giolito and Blaine Hardy. Giolito has the worst ERA in baseball and has the same number of wins as Jacob deGrom, who has the best ERA in baseball. That's very sad. That's a referendum on how bad the Mets are. Indians Reds, Corey Kluber and Sal Romano. 7:30, Marlins Braves. Trevor Richards and Anibal Sanchez. 8 o'clock, Diamondbacks Rangers. Patrick Corbin and Yvonne Gallardo. Let's see if the Diamondbacks can bounce back from a disappointing loss last night. Pirates Twins. Jamison Tyon and Jake Odorizzi. Rockies Astros, big series for Colorado. Big series for Houston, too. Houston's only up 2 games in the division over the Athletics. That's credit to Oakland. And Houston's got to end this home losing streak soon. The pressure's on the Houston Astros. And good thing for them is that they have Justin Verlander going up tonight. But the bad news is that Justin Verlander was ripped apart his last start against Seattle. And going for Colorado is German Marquez. Blue Jays Royals, Ryan Baroque and Heath Fillmyer. Nationals Cardinals. Cardinals playing a lot better baseball since the managerial change. They've been the best team in the National League from a record standpoint over the last 25 games under their new intern manager. They have John Gant going on the mound tonight against Gio Gonzalez. That's an 8:15 game. 10 o'clock, Mariners Athletics. James Paxton and Mike Fiers. Giants Dodgers. To see if the Dodgers can bounce back finally. Alex Wood against Andrew Suarez. And last but not least, Angels Padres. You have Jaime Barria and Brett Kennedy. All right. The player I left off my running back rankings, and he is a top 100 player in the NFL for sure, is a player that was out last season due to a wrist injury, and that's David Johnson of the Arizona Cardinals. I feel very bad that I left him off. That was my mistake. I guess his name wasn't on the depth chart. Maybe he's still on the IR that I don't know about. But I have him ranked second on my running back rankings, only behind Le'Veon Bell. And the rest of my top 10 were the previous top 10, with except Christian McCaffrey, who I had 10, is now at 11. Devontae Freeman's 10, Derrick Henry 9, Melvin Gordon 8, LaShawn McCoy 7, Saquon Barkley 6, Leonard Fournette 5, Alvin Kamara 4, Ezekiel Elliott 3, Johnson 2, and Le'Veon Bell 1. And now I'm going to do my NFL player top 100 rankings. These are all players in the league with the exception of kickers and punters. I don't think kickers and punters would have made this list anyway. Before I get into my top 100, here are my honorable mentions. Tyler Eifert, the tight end of the Cincinnati Bengals. Jordan Reed, tight end, Washington Redskins. Delaney Walker, tight end, Tennessee Titans. Hunter Henry, tight end, Los Angeles Chargers. Greg Olsen, tight end, Carolina Panthers. Thomas Davis, outside linebacker, Carolina Panthers. Jimmy Graham, tight end, Packers. Kyle Rudolph, tight end, Minnesota Vikings. Kareem Hunt, running back, Kansas City Chiefs. Michael Bennett, defensive end, Philadelphia Eagles. Jay Ajayi, running back, Philadelphia Eagles. Michael Thomas, wide receiver, New Orleans Saints. Deion Jones, middle linebacker, Atlanta Falcons. Whitney Merciless, outside linebacker, Houston Texans. Brian Orakpo, outside linebacker, Tennessee Titans. Jason Peters, left tackle, Philadelphia Eagles. David Bakhtiari, left tackle, Green Bay Packers. Donald Penn, left tackle, Oakland Raiders. Adam Thielen, wide receiver, Minnesota Vikings. Kaleki Osemele, guard, Oakland Raiders. Dalvin Cook, running back, Minnesota Vikings. Aqib Talib, cornerback, Los Angeles Rams. Joe Hayden, cornerback, Pittsburgh Steelers. Casey Hayward, cornerback, Los Angeles Chargers. AJ Boyd, cornerback, Jacksonville Jaguars. Brandon Cooks, wide receiver, Los Angeles Rams. Terrell Suggs, outside linebacker, Baltimore Ravens. Dante Hightower, linebacker, New England Patriots. Sean Lee, outside linebacker, Dallas Cowboys. Clay Matthews, outside linebacker, Green Bay Packers. Desmond Trufant, cornerback, Atlanta Falcons. And Yannick Ngakoue, defensive end, Jacksonville Jaguars. And here I present to you my top 100 players going into the NFL this season. All these predictions I did with the position rankings, the individual position rankings, I should say. I projected it on what I expect this season and part of what you did last season. If there's a player that I expect to take a step back, then they are obviously lower on the respective lists. And if there's a player that I expect to have a breakout season, I put them a little bit higher on the individual position player ranking lists. Now, here we go. Top 100 players in the NFL. 100. Cameron Hayward. He's probably the best defensive end, or I should say defensive lineman on the Steelers. I expect him to lead that defense while Ryan Shazier recovers from that gruesome injury last year. 99, Cameron Wake, the best defensive lineman on the Dolphins right now, with the releasing of Ndamukong Suh. 98, Jordy Nelson. I think he'll prove to be a good pickup with the Oakland Raiders, and it's a nice weapon for Derek Carr to have and a good veteran in that locker room. I think having good veterans matter in the NFL, and not just in the NFL, in all sports. 97, Alshon Jeffrey. A big help to the Eagles' Super Bowl win last year. He's their number one receiver. I expect him to have a good season this year, regardless of Foles or Wentz at quarterback. 96, Mitchell Schwartz, one of the better right tackles in the NFL. He holds that offensive line in Kansas City together for the most part. Did a good job protecting Alex Smith. He's going to do a good job protecting Patrick Mahomes. 95, Cordy Glenn was traded from the Bills to the Bengals in the offseason. I think he'll help Andy Dalton this upcoming season. 94, Nate Solder, somebody who I think is going to help Eli Manning in that offense this year. He's going to be a big part of whether the Giants really improve offensively or not. Of course they will, because of the addition of Saquon Barkley and Odell Beckham Jr. coming back from injury. But if he's healthy, that offensive line is going to see some massive improvement. 93, Julian Edelman, somebody that I expect to come back and be productive coming off the injury last year. And he's suspended to start the season too, which isn't good for the Patriots. And I expect him to come back and be Tom Brady's number one receiver again. 92, Mike Evans, somebody that I think is underrated in this league, and someone that I think is a top 100 player in this league, obviously. And he's a big weapon for Jameis Winston. And Winston just has to improve as a passer and a playmaker in the league. And Evans is a big part of that. 91, Richard Sherman, somebody that I expect to have a big year in San Francisco. He's going to be motivated, especially when they play at Seattle. I can't wait for that game. And he'll certainly help improve a secondary that wasn't good last year. 90, Budda Baker. He was one of the better rookies in the league last year that were overlooked. He made the Pro Bowl last year, and I expect him to be great again for the Cardinals this season on a defense that I think is underrated coming into the season. 89, Keanu Neal, a big part of Atlanta's secondary. He's a safety that I think is trending in the right direction in the league. 88, Andrew Norwell. I think he's going to prove to be a big addition to Jacksonville's offensive line. He'll help Blake Bortles in that run game. 87, Max Unger. I think that trade turned out to be a big win for the New Orleans Saints. Jimmy Graham didn't work out in Seattle. They got back Unger in return. And when Seattle traded away Unger, their offensive line got worse. And Max Unger has to get some credit for Drew Brees still playing at a high level. Obviously, Brees himself deserves credit for that too, but it always helps to have a good offensive line. 86, Jason Kelce. One of the great centers in this league, was a big part of the Eagles' offensive line that is one of the more underrated units in the league and is on the reigning champion Eagles, obviously. 85, Rodney Hudson is a part of one of the best offensive lines in the league with the Raiders and a big part of what the Raiders want to do. And they have to keep Derek Carr upright. He's gotten hurt a couple times over the last few seasons, and I expect Derek Carr to have a big season this year. And having a good offensive line, like I just mentioned, it always helps. 84, Zach Ertz. One of Carson Wentz and Nick Foles' great weapons. I think he's one of the better tight ends in the league, one of the more improved tight ends in the league. I think he's going to be around for a while. 83, Trey Turner. A big part of the Panthers' success over the last 5 years or so. Has helped Cam Newton stay upright, although Cam's been banged up a little bit a couple times over the last few seasons. 82, David DeCastro. On the Steelers' offensive line, he's helped Ben Roethlisberger stay upright and helps create holes for Le'Veon Bell in the run game. 81, Christian McCaffrey. He's a player I expect to make a leap this season. He had a nice rookie season, but a lot of people called it a failure because of how great of a year Alvin Kamara had last year with the Saints. But I expect Christian McCaffrey to make a big jump this season with the Carolina Panthers. And I believe that he'll be a big help for Cam Newton this season on a team that I think people are sleeping on in the NFC South. 80, Marcus Mariota. I expect him to have a better year than last year. Last year I thought was a little bit of a disappointment for him. A lot of people had him pegged as an MVP winner last year. He didn't play like an MVP last year. I expect him to have a bounce-back season this year with the new coach in town. And I expect Derrick Henry to improve in the run game as well. And I think Deion Lewis will actually be a nice addition for the Titans as well. 79, Jared Goff, coming off of a breakout year. And I don't expect regression from Goff. He has a lot of good weapons. Todd Gurley is one of the best running backs in the league. And Gurley is somebody else that I forgot on this list as well, and on the running backs list. And I have him now in the number 2 spot behind Le'Veon Bell. And I just added Gurley to the top 100 players list, which means that Cameron Hayward is now an honorable mention. I should say the 101st spot. And back to Goff, I think Gurley's a big help. Brandon Cooks, a very good wide receiver. I expect him to have a breakout year this year and emerge as one of the better receivers in the league. I had him ranked pretty high in my receiver rankings as well. And there's other receivers that were good last year, like Cameron Kupp. And I expect the Rams to be a contender this season. And now at Goff's 80, 79 is Keenan Allen from the Los Angeles Chargers. I think he was one of the more underrated receivers in the league. Big part of that offense, along with Melvin Gordon. It stinks that Hunter Henry's hurt, or else he would have been a big part of what they do as well. Number 78, A.J. Green. He's still a very good wide receiver in the league. I just think he's overlooked now because the Bengals haven't really done much over the last couple seasons. 77, Devontae Freeman. Freeman's a big part of what Atlanta does offensively. He's emerged as one of the better running backs over the last couple seasons. 76, Derrick Henry. I expect him to have a big season this year. And I think there's a chance he's in play for Offensive Player of the Year, like as a very, very long shot. Because he was a stud at Alabama, and he's just about lived up to that reputation with the Titans, especially in the postseason game against the Chiefs, which helped carry that team. I expect him to be really good this season. 75, LaShawn McCoy, somebody that I think is on the decline, but he's still a very good running back. And I think once Josh Allen starts for them, I think McCoy will be a big part of what he does, and he'll help him with the run game and whatnot. 74, Ezekiel Ansah, somebody that's in a contract year, and I expect him to have a big season this year, and I bet he'll get paid big time. And to me, the question is whether it's by the Lions or somebody else. 73, Danielle Hunter, I think one of the more underrated defensive ends in the entire league. He's on that loaded Vikings defensive line, which I think is what making him overlooked. And he deserved that contract extension he got this offseason as well. 72, Marcus Peters, somebody that I think will be a big help to their secondary, which wasn't great last year. 71, Quentin Nelson, one of, I believe, 2 rookies on this list. And I really love Nelson. And I think he's going to be a franchise offensive lineman for years to come and will be a big help to Andrew Luck this season. 70, Alex Mack, somebody that's been one of the better offensive linemen in the league over the last couple seasons. Been a big part of Atlanta's success. 69, Tyrann Mathieu, I expect him to have a bounce-back season and stay healthy. He'll certainly help what I feel is the weakest part of the Houston Texans team, which is the secondary. And if Mathieu stays healthy and plays at a high level, maybe that won't even be a weakness for the Texans anymore. 68, Eric Weddle, somebody who came over as a free agent a few years ago with the Ravens and has lived up to that contract. 67, Melvin Gordon, a big part of what the Chargers do offensively. And whenever he's not in the lineup, the Chargers' offense is not very good. 66, Melvin Ingram, one of the more underrated pass rushers in the league. And I think he's poised for a big season playing with Joey Bosa. 65, Cameron Jordan, one of the more underrated defensive players in the league. He's the leader of that Saints defensive line. He's been a Pro Bowler a couple times in the last few years, and I think that's overlooked a lot because the Saints always had a reputation of a bad defense, and their defense was bad until last season when they drafted some good young players to help them immediately. 64, Andrew Luck. As I said in the quarterback rankings, I'm going to say it now. This ranking could be too low or too high by the time the season's over. If Andrew Luck is not the same guy that he was 4 or 5 years ago, this ranking is too high. If he is the same guy that he was 4 or 5 years ago, then this ranking is too low. 63, Brandon Scherff, one of the more underrated offensive linemen in the NFL. He's helped Kirk Cousins stay upright over the last couple years, and he'll certainly help Alex Smith this year. 62, Marshall Yanda, I think one of the more underrated guards in the league too. Been a big help for Joe Flacco. 61, Geno Atkins, somebody I think has become underrated for the same reasons why A.J. Green has become underrated, because the team hasn't had success in a couple years, but Geno Atkins is still one of the better defensive tackles in the league. 60, Chris Harris Jr., probably the best defensive back on the Broncos right now. I think he's been underrated the last couple of years because Denver had Aqib Talib, among others, in their secondary over those last couple of years when they were a contender. 59, DeAndre Hopkins, Someone who I expect to have a big season this year with Deshaun Watson back and healthy. 58, Malik Jackson. I think Malik Jackson is very underrated because he's on a loaded defense with the Jaguars, similar to Daniel Hunter and the Vikings. Just an underrated player playing on a loaded defense. And Malik Jackson was also great when he was on the Broncos as well, and has lived up to that contract that the Jaguars gave him. 57, Xavier Rhodes. One of the more improving corners in the league over the last 2-3 years. He's done a great job covering some of the best receivers in the league, such as Odell Beckham Jr. and Mike Evans and Antonio Brown. So this guy, I think, is going to be around for a while. My highest ranked rookie on here, 56, Saquon Barkley. He's going to be special this year on the Giants. I think there's a very realistic possibility of him winning the Offensive Rookie of the Year award. And I think he's going to be a flat-out star. I think he's going to be the best player from this draft class. And I really think he's going to be a big part of what the Giants do this year, although I think it's a question whether the Giants are actually going to be good or not. And that has nothing to do with Barkley from a standpoint of whether the offensive line's improved or not, and whether the defense could be better than it was last year. And plus, Saquon has to stay healthy because he's dealing with a little bit of a tweak of the hamstring right now. I don't think he'll play in the rest of the preseason. They'll get him right for week 1. But like I said, I think Barkley's going to be a special, special player in this league. 55, Jimmy Garoppolo. I think last year was awesome for him. But part of me thinks that he might regress a little bit. I don't think he'll go undefeated again. But I do think they'll have a better record than last year. But are they a playoff team? That's remained to be seen. 54, Everson Griffin has been a stud on the Vikings defensive line the last few years. And another player that's arguably overlooked as well as my number 53 player, and that's Calais Campbell of the Jacksonville Jaguars. He's a big part of their defense as well. I believe he led the league in sacks last year. Number 52, Linval Joseph, defensive tackle, Minnesota Vikings. This is the guy that gets all the attention on the Vikings D-line. They signed him away from the Giants in free agency about 4 years ago and has lived up to that contract, and then they gave him an extension, and he's shown no signs of decline. 51, Vic Beasley, the pass rusher from the Falcons. I expect him to be great this season, and I expect him to be one of the better pass rushers in the league going forward. 50, Chandler Jones. I think it was a big mistake for New England to trade him away. He was great last year on the Cardinals. 49, Gerald McCoy. I think he's one of the more underrated defensive tackles in the league, partially because he's stuck on the Buccaneers, who haven't been relevant in a while. Although the Buccaneers were in playoff contention 2 years ago, but they did not make the playoffs. 48, Leonard Fournette, the most important player for the Jaguars offense, although Blake Bortles obviously has an argument to be made for that. But Fournette is the key piece of their offense, and when he was healthy, their offense was very good. 47, Zach Martin, one of the best offensive linemen in the league ever since he was drafted by the Cowboys. He was a steal at where the Cowboys took him, and he's been a Pro Bowler pretty much every season. 46, Taylor Lewan, same situation, a steal at where the Titans selected him in the draft, and is a big part of what they do, and has certainly been a big asset for Marcus Mariota. 45, Alvin Kamara. To me, the question with him is, will he repeat the rookie season he had, or will he take a step back? I think that is one of the biggest questions for the Saints this season, and it could be a determining factor whether the Saints can repeat the success they had last season or not, and the same goes for their defense. 44, Travis Kelce, one of the better tight ends in the league. I think the most important offensive player on the team other than Mahomes, and in the last few years other than Alex Smith. And once he got hurt last year, the Chiefs fell apart in that playoff game. That is very overlooked because the Chiefs are known for their postseason failures under Andy Reid. 43, Trent Williams. Certainly the best offensive lineman on the Redskins, and somebody that was a big help to Kirk Cousins and will be a big help to Alex Smith. 42, Jarrell Casey, one of the more underrated defensive ends in the league. Somebody that I think is only going to get better. 41, Marshawn Lattimore. Somebody who I expect to be one of the better cornerbacks in the league going forward. The leader of the Saints' young secondary. 40, Malcolm Jenkins. Somebody that's improved over the last couple seasons and a big part of the Eagles' Super Bowl run in their secondary. 39, Harrison Smith. Another defensive back that has improved over the last couple seasons. 38, Bobby Wagner, who is probably the only relevant name from that defense left from that Super Bowl team from a few years ago, other than Byron Maxwell, who actually left the Seahawks for a few years. 37, Justin Houston, somebody who has gotten hurt a lot over the last couple seasons, but when healthy is one of the better linebackers in the league. 36, Jadeveon Clowney, a late bloomer, somebody who's been hurt a couple times early in his career, but once he got healthy, he became the player that most people thought he was going to be. 35, Anthony Barr, a big part of the Vikings defense, somebody that's also improved over the last couple seasons. 34, Deshaun Watson, to me the biggest X factor in the league this season, perhaps. If he comes back and is the same player that he was before he got hurt, then the Houston Texans are a Super Bowl contender. 33, Derek Carr. I expect him to have a bounce-back season this year and to stay healthy. He has better weapons around him. He absolutely loves John Gruden, apparently. 32, Russell Wilson. I've talked about the Seahawks a little bit when I mentioned Bobby Wagner and how that defense isn't the same anymore. Russell Wilson is a key cog to the Seahawks and a big reason why that team is still relevant. 31, Cam Newton. I expect him to have a big year this year. And I already mentioned how I think Christian McCaffrey is going to be a big breakout star in the league this year. I think the addition of first-round pick DJ Moore will help Cam Newton as well. In the passing game, Greg Olson's still around. I think the Panthers, as I mentioned before, are a sleeper team this year in the league. 30, Travis Frederick, one of the best centers in the NFL. Helped protect Tony Romo at the late end of his prime and has helped protect Dak Prescott the last 2 years. But to me, the key of the Cowboys' success this year is whether Dak Prescott returns to his rookie form or not. 29, Marquise Pouncey, who I rated as my number one center in the league going into the season. Although Travis Frederick has an argument too. Pouncey, the year he was hurt, the Steelers were not very good. And when he's healthy, the Steelers are good. And so he's one of the more underrated players in the league in terms of a team's success or not. 28, Eric Berry. He's still around. And I think he's going to have a good year this year after being hurt. 27, Phillip Rivers. Someone who I expect a big season from. Although his tight end, Hunter Henry's out for the season with the torn ACL. I expect a mini leap or even a breakout from the receiver Mike Williams, who they drafted last year. And I really expect Keenan Allen to have a big year. Melvin Gordon. I think the Chargers can be poised for big things this season. 26, Carson Wentz. If he were healthy, I would have had him higher on this list. That's just facts. That guy was running away with the MVP last year, and then he tore his ACL, and that cost him the MVP. Tom Brady won it instead. And to me, the big question with the Eagles this year is if Wentz is back in time or not. Because if he's not back in time and Nick Foles struggles, that might be a problem. But in favor for the Eagles, their first division game, I believe, is Week 6 against the Giants in MetLife Stadium. You got to make sure Wentz is back for at least that game. Because what if the Giants get off to a good start this season? Just saying. Or even the Cowboys or Washington. Like, one of these teams could get off to a good start and say Foles falters and the Eagles might not look the same. And don't forget about Super Bowl hangover, too, because that happens sometimes, as we all know. 25, Matt Ryan. Someone who I expect to have a big year this year. I think he'll look closer to the guy that won the MVP in 2016 rather than the guy we saw last year. I'm not a fan of their offensive coordinator, Steve Sarkisian. I made that known on this podcast a lot. But I expect Ryan to have a big season. 24, Fletcher Cox. The best defensive player on the Eagles. An absolutely dominant defensive lineman in the league. 23, Ndamukong Suh, someone who I think will absolutely help the Rams' defensive line, playing alongside Aaron Donald. 22, Rob Gronkowski. I expect him to be healthy this year and have a big impact on the Patriots' offense. 21, Drew Brees. He's still playing at a high level. And a big part of that is all the weapons he has around them, such as Michael Thomas and Alvin Kamara. 20, Ezekiel Elliott. I expect him to have a bounce-back season this year and look like the guy we saw in his rookie season as well. I think his suspension cost the Cowboys a playoff spot last year. 19, Luke Kuechly, the best defensive player on the Carolina Panthers. He's the heart and soul of that defense. I expect him to have a good year this year. 18, Khalil Mack. I think this gets resolved, and he'll be back playing for the Oakland Raiders and John Gruden. 17, Ben Roethlisberger. I expect him to have another big season. He's nearing the tail end of his prime, as well as Breeze and Rivers and Eli Manning. And Manning didn't even make the list. 16, Von Miller. Someone who I expect to have a big year on the Broncos. I think the best linebacker in football. He's been a stud since the day he arrived in the league. 15, Joey Bosa. Someone who I expect to be in contention for the Defensive Player of the Year award. 14, J.J. Watt. He's coming off an injury as well, and I expect him to be close to the player he once was before all these injuries started to get to him. 33, Patrick Peterson. I think he's poised for a big season as well in Arizona. 12, Landon Collins. He had a good year last year, but the team did not have a good year, especially that defense. I expect the Giants' defense to be better and for Collins to stay healthy throughout the season. 11, Julio Jones. I expect that situation in Atlanta to get solved and him to be back for the season. The Falcons absolutely need him. 10, David Johnson. One of the best offensive players in football when he's healthy. It sucks last year that he had a wrist injury that cost him a lot of his season. 9, Jalen Ramsey, the best defensive back in the league, already in his third season. He's the best player on the Jacksonville Jaguars. And that defense is awesome, and he's a big reason why. 8, Todd Gurley. I forgot to include him on the initial rankings on this list, as I mentioned before. And same with the running back rankings. Like I mentioned before, I threw him at the number 2 spot and David Johnson at 3. but he's a big part of what the Rams do offensively, and the Rams are nothing without Todd Gurley. 7, Odell Beckham Jr. I expect him to come back and be one of, if not the best receiver in football. He's so dynamic, and the Giants' offense was garbage whenever he wasn't healthy. 6, Antonio Brown. I have Brown ahead of Beckham because Brown has been healthy more over the last year plus than Beckham. And Brown obviously plays on a better team than Beckham, which helps Brown's cause a little bit. 5, Tyron Smith. Probably the best offensive lineman in the league. I had him certainly ranked number 1 on my list. He's a big part of that Cowboys offensive line over the last couple seasons, protecting, like I said, Tony Romo late in his prime and Dak Prescott right now, as I was talking about Travis Frederick and Zach Martin. I expect Smith to play at a high level again this season. 4, Aaron Donald. I expect that situation to get resolved and him to be back at camp and playing for the Los Angeles Rams. He's the best defensive player in the league. 3, Le'Veon Bell. I think this is probably his last season as a member of the Pittsburgh Steelers. I don't think the Steelers want to keep him long term. I think by this time next year we'll be talking about James Conner being their starting running back. 2, Aaron Rodgers. And number 1, Tom Brady. Debatable flip of the coin for Rodgers and Brady. Brady's ahead of Rodgers because Rodgers has been unable to stay healthy over the last couple seasons, unlike Brady. And Brady has led his team to the last 2 Super Bowls. And that is a big part of why Brady is ahead of Rodgers on this list. And that's it for my top 100 players. Now I'm going to quickly do my coach rankings. 32-1. 32, Frank Reich. 31, Matt Patricia. 30, Matt Nagy. All 3 of those guys in year 1. 29, Hugh Jackson. He's the worst coach in football that isn't a rookie head coach. 28, Vance Joseph. I thought he was awful last season and should have been fired. He's on the hot seat this year. 27, Todd Bowles. I believe he's coaching for his job in New York. 26, Dirk Cutter. He's coaching for his job in Tampa Bay. Same goes for guys 25, 24, and 23. Gase 25, Adam Gase I should say. Marvin Lewis 24, Jay Gruden 23. All those guys are coaching for their jobs as well, in my opinion. 22, Mike Vrabel. I had him 22, even though he's a rookie head coach. I just think he did a great job as defensive coordinator of the Houston Texans the last couple years. And 21 is also a rookie head coach. That's Steve Wilks. I think he did a great job as defensive coordinator of the Carolina Panthers the last couple seasons. And that's why those 2 guys are ranked higher than 30 on this list. 20, Jason Garrett. I believe he's coaching for his job as well, a.k.a. the Clapper. 19, Pat Shurmur. He coached the Browns and actually coached the Browns to a 6-10 record, which is a rarity in the NFL. I think he'll do a good job with the Giants with the weapons he had. He'll certainly be an upgrade over Ben McAdoo, who was the worst coach in football last season for sure. And Shurmur also did a great job as offensive coordinator with the Minnesota Vikings as well. You got to give him credit for getting so much out of Case Keenum. 18, John Gruden. This is like Andrew Luck with quarterbacks. John Gruden hasn't coached in the NFL in over a decade. This could be too high depending on how the Raiders do this year, or too low depending on how the Raiders do this year. It all depends on how the Raiders do this year to determine John Gruden's ranking on this list. So I just threw him right smack in the middle. 17, Anthony Lynn. I think he did a good job last year with the Chargers, especially rebounding from the 0-4 start to go 9-7. That team should have made the playoffs a year ago. 16, Dan Quinn. Took the Falcons to the Super Bowl. Last year, the team lost in the division round to Philly. Could have won that game. 15, Mike McCarthy. I believe he is coaching for his job if Green Bay does not make the playoffs this season, which I think is a possibility. I believe he'll be out of a job. 14, Sean McDermott. I think he did a great job with the Bills last year. But I think this year will determine McDermott and whether he will be a good coach or not. because I expect the Bills to take a step back. 13, Bill O'Brien. I think he's done a great job. His first couple seasons with the Texans last year I thought was an aberration because his two best players were hurt in Deshaun Watson and J.J. Watt. And they had another player hurt in Whitney Merciless as well. I expect a big bounce back for the Houston Texans, and I think O'Brien's a pretty solid head coach. 12, Andy Reid. This ranking might be a little too low because of his playoff failures, but I just don't think he's that great of a coach. Only made one Super Bowl in his coaching career, which was in 2005 with the Philadelphia Eagles. It was the 2004 season. 11, Kyle Shanahan. I think he did a great job with the 49ers last year, rebounding from that, I believe it was 0-10 start to finish 5-11. Regardless of how they do this year, I think he'll be a good coach in this league. I just think that's a team that is maybe a year or two away from being a contender. 10, Ron Rivera, two-time NFL Coach of the Year winner. And I think he's a pretty darn good coach in this league. And we learned that over the last 4 or 5 years. A lot of those years, the Panthers exceeded expectations. And Ron Rivera was a hot seat coach for a lot of people. But I think he's one of the better coaches in the NFL. 9, John Harbaugh. A lot of people are going to yell at me and say that he should be ranked higher, but the Ravens made the playoffs in a couple of seasons. And I think Harbaugh could be coaching for his job. 8, Mike Tomlin. Same thing. I don't think a lot of people say, oh, that's too low. But the Steelers haven't made the Super Bowl since the 2010 season. And Mike Tomlin's had some playoff gaffes over the last few years. 7, Sean Payton. I think he did a great job last year getting the Saints to the playoffs. And now the expectations are on the Saints again this year. 6, Pete Carroll. I think this year is a big year for Pete Carroll. And I think if they underachieve, he could be let go. And he lost a lot of key players from those teams that were contending. I think this is a big challenge for him. 5, Doug Marrone. I think he was fantastic last year with the Jacksonville Jaguars. I think the Bills regret not getting rid of him. Although McDermott's a nice coach. But my argument is that they probably regret letting him go for Rex Ryan. And the Jets wanted to hire Marrone and didn't because a beat writer, Manish Mehta from the New York Daily News, did what I believe was false reporting on Marrone and some past incidents he had, so that pretty much spooked the Jets away, and he was in play for the Giants job a few years ago. Instead, that went to Ben McAdoo. So I think the two New York teams made mistakes on passing up on Doug Marrone. Although the Jets' argument is due to fake reporting, in my opinion, rather than just passing up on him for coaching reasons. Because he's clearly a better head coach than Todd Bowles at this point. 4, Sean McVay. I think he was fantastic last year at the Rams. He was a big reason why for Jared Goff's breakout, and I expect Jared Goff to have continued success this season, as well as Sean McVay and the Rams. 3, Mike Zimmer. Zimmer has done outstanding with the Vikings since he took that job. A couple playoff appearances, couple 8-8s, but those 8-8s had some injuries involved and some poor quarterback play. Now they actually have a better quarterback with Kirk Cousins, and I think the Cousins-Zimmer marriage would be a good one. 2, Doug Peterson, the head coach of the reigning Super Bowl champion Philadelphia Eagles. I thought he was fantastic last year. He might have been coaching for his job last year because I don't think he did a good job in year 1. He made improvements and made the Eagles into a Super Bowl champion in year 2. And number 1, Bill Belichick. As long as he's a head coach in the National Football League, he'll always have my number one ranking. And that's it for the coach rankings. The NBCSN hockey schedule came out yesterday. I'll just talk about some key games on the schedule. The Wednesday night rivalry has changed to Wednesday night hockey. The opening day doubleheader, I should say opening night, October 3rd, that's also going to be the same day as the American League wildcard game in baseball. You have the Bruins and the Capitals unveiled their Stanley Cup banner, and two Western Conference contenders in the Ducks and the Sharks playing it out. On Black Friday, you have your annual Black Friday game. You have the Rangers at the Flyers on NBC. The Rangers always tend to be in this game every year. They weren't last year, but they are this year. But the weird thing is that expectations are low for the Rangers going into this season, and rightfully so, because they pretty much tore down their team over the last 2+ years. Although they were a playoff team in the 2016-17 season, but not this past season. And Philadelphia, I think, is a contender in the Eastern Conference this year. Other games, the Winter Classic, Bruins, Blackhawks from South Bend. That's going to be interesting, although the Blackhawks, like the Rangers, won't be good this season. And Chicago thinks they're a win-now team, but they really should be rebuilding like the New York Rangers should. In other NBC games, you have Capitals at the Blackhawks on January 20th. A primetime regional twosome of Tampa Bay at the Rangers and Minnesota at Chicago. 8 o'clock NBC. I'm sure one game will be on NBC in one region and the other game will be on NBCSN in the other region. The intrigue for Tampa at the Rangers is that's Ryan McDonough's return to MSG as well as JT Miller's. And on Super Bowl Sunday, you have the Bruins at the Capitals at 12:30. February 10th, St. Louis at the Predators. I expect a bounce-back season for the St. Louis Blues this year. That's going to be, I'm just listing off NBC games. And on the Sunday of President's Day, February 17th, you have the Rangers at Pittsburgh, 12:30. St. Louis at Minnesota at 3 o'clock. That's the NBC doubleheader. Saturday, February 23rd is a night game at Lincoln Financial Field where the Flyers host the Penguins. That's a great game. Those are going to be two of the better teams in the Eastern Conference this year, although Pittsburgh I can see taking a step back due to some of their losses. March 3rd, Sunday matinee game, Washington at the Rangers. So the defending champs at Madison Square Garden. Also a matinee game on Sunday, March 24th, Philadelphia at Washington. March 31st, another Sunday matinee game, the Rangers at Philadelphia. So my big takeaway for the NBCSN schedule, the champs are getting a lot of respect. This is just the NBC portion of the schedule. There's a lot of NBCSN games, more NBCSN games than ever. They're trying to do what the NBA does and do a lot of doubleheaders. And I like that NBC is putting on more hockey. But yeah, as I mentioned, the champs are getting a lot of games, and rightfully so. They're the defending champs. The Flyers are getting a lot of respect, so the league must think highly of them, as well as the Tampa Bay Lightning and the Boston Bruins. And I mentioned the Rangers and the Chicago Blackhawks, two teams that I don't think are playoff teams going into next season, getting a lot of NBC love. That's because there's still big-name players on each side, like Henrik Lundqvist for the Rangers, Jonathan Toews and Patrick Kane on the Blackhawks, and they're two big market teams as well. So that's my big takeaways as a whole for the NBC schedule. And last but not least, CC Sabathia of the Yankees was placed on the 10-day disabled list with a knee issue. I think he's only going to miss one start, and I think they'll probably put Chance Adams or Luis Cessa in that start spot for CC on Friday night against the Toronto Blue Jays. That's it for today's podcast. I apologize with the Todd Gurley, David Johnson misses on my running back and top 100 NFL players list. And I'll be back tomorrow recapping all of today's baseball action. Look ahead to tomorrow's action. And I'll also be doing my top 100 players in college football as well as my NFL kicker rankings. I hope you guys have a great day.